Hi, it is April 25th, 2020. I am Greg Farrar, and this is my daily COVID-19 live stream, trends live stream. So I will be going over the trends by country, and then by states of the United States, and then counties of California. My background here may look a little less elegant than previously. Like everyone, I'm working from home, and we've just moved people around a little bit to help with our distancing from each other. And so now I'm streaming from my basement or garage or whatever this room is. So whatever, all you need is my face anyway. Don't even need that actually. But if you see what appears to be storage behind me instead of the elegant windows and walls you saw previously, that's because I'm streaming from my basement. We'll see if that continues. In any case, let's start with not that. Let's start with cases by country. Some interesting stuff is going to come up here today. I've, as usual, did a little bit of pre-analysis to sort of get a sense of where things are trending before I just dive in and look at the latest day without any sort of prep, which I sometimes have done. And there's some interesting things we're going to talk about here today about data sources and different way of measuring, because we have at least one outright contradiction in the data you're going to see today, and I will attempt to explain that. Here we have the United States, as always, leading in total cases, followed by everyone else quite a bit behind. More interesting, as always, is the daily. I think it's more interesting anyway. The daily cases, which show that the United States, though leading, is trending downward in a rather nice way. We really have seen a few days now that are clearly below everyone else. Not quite enough to call it a definite trend that we're going to see 15 or 10 in the next few days, but it's totally plausible from looking at this that we may see 15,000 or 10,000 in just a matter of days. We'll see. Right? The trend line, its best guess is it's going to be 3 days, we'll hit 20,000 or something like that. But it's looking nice. Lots of other countries, as always, are showing downward trends of that sort. I'm going to go to the per capita numbers, though, where it's a little more obvious. I've still been having some trouble with my plotting software, but yes, it was nice to me that time and didn't give me a blank chart when I zoomed in. Switzerland is looking great. Switzerland is looking great. When I originally started this, we really needed the rope charts, the growth charts to show who was turning the corner, but that is weeks behind us in many cases. It jumps right out of these daily charts. Who's turned the corner? Who's turned a corner? It's Spain, it's Switzerland, it's Italy. Oh, and by the way, there may be people walking into this room while I'm live streaming as well, so it's not just crowing roosters in my background anymore. We'll probably have actual humans carrying stuff, boxes around, and so on. So try not to be distracted, and I will do the same. Switzerland, Spain, Italy, all looking good. Spain, as we've seen, not looking as good. It's not trending downward in this delightful way we see of Switzerland. It's kind of flattening off here, which is in the wrong direction. We saw it flatten off, and then we saw it heading downward in a way that looked very nice, and then not anymore. It's turning back upwards. So we'll keep an eye on that. This is Belgium. Belgium's looking pretty good. The United States, as we saw in the previous graph, has peaked apparently and is heading downward. The worst certainly is Ireland. We've seen this in recent days. Ireland has burst out above everyone in per capita numbers and is definitely not peaking, though it does have a couple of good days, so maybe it's coming towards peaking. We may actually see it below zero in daily growth once we look at that rope chart. And then other places, Austria and so on. Lots of countries looking quite good here. Portugal. When we look at the rope chart, what I vaguely see here is a swoop down for a couple weeks ago, and then maybe a slight turn upwards. If so, that's bad news. It suggests that the country, or the world as a whole, maybe, really, when I see this, I see a lot of upward lines here now. There's a whole cluster of sort of the original crowd who are all heading downwards in the crest zero. There are a lot of ones that are showing good trends. Turkey is the best of all, but also the United States actually is arguably the second best in the world out of the top 25 in its trend right now. 5% fewer cases each day and dropping. So the United States is looking very good right now. Since I do work with very short-term trends here, moving averages of 3 days, these lines can change quickly. But right now, as of today, the United States is looking quite good. Netherlands also looking good, and just a lot of other ones looking pretty good. Ones that aren't looking good are Mexico, which is our new top contender to be an epicenter of growth. Sweden, not so great. Again, I always point at Sweden as one of the ones who hasn't been doing some of the shelter-in-place restrictions as stringently, and so whenever I see Sweden doing something like this, 6%, 7% daily growth and rising, I think in the end someone's going to do an analysis and they're going to say, oh, Sweden really hurt itself by not doing shelter-in-place. I don't know if that's the case. That's just my vague sense of it, is that there is a reason that Sweden is doing worse than just about everyone else. Mexico also doing poorly. Brazil, however, Brazil and Sweden are the two poster children for just letting people out of their houses and hoping it all works well and hoping people use common sense. And those are the third and fourth worst right now in the world. The two that are in the news as doing the experiment, which I'm glad they're doing, because then we'll be able to say later. We'll be able to analyze the data later and say, did it work or not? But the first glimmer of it suggests not so much, or maybe it did if their focus is on things other than number of cases. If they're trying to keep people happy and keep mental health high, or if their focus is on economic growth and restoring the economic situation there, then maybe they are doing exactly what they want. But in terms of cases, what they're doing is not working. If that were their focus, it doesn't seem to be working right now. Brazil and Sweden, both well above zero in the bottom few worldwide countries, and rising, at least especially Sweden is rising. Saudi Arabia, which has really been problematic, I think they just popped onto the bottom number 25 just a few days ago. They still have a pretty high growth rate of 7%, but at least they're trending downward. So Saudi Arabia, if we had to guess, has peaked and is heading, well, it hasn't peaked in total cases, but its growth rate has peaked, and it'll be some time now, days, before it actually hits zero at this rate. But Saudi Arabia is looking better after looking pretty bad for a while there. Mexico is not looking better. It's got everything we hate to see in a trend line, a growth chart strand, and a rope chart strand. It's got a high rate, 13%, not terribly high. We see 20 sometimes, but a high rate of growth of daily new cases and rising. This is another interesting one. Spain has busted out from below the zero line. Spain, which was a real recovery story, has lost its grip on recovery. We've seen this for several days. Gradually, Spain was looking worse. It started to slow down compared to Italy, which was doing very well. Let's see where Italy is right now. Yeah, Italy is actually doing something. It's kind of doing a Spain as well. Italy is heading back towards that zero line. So Spain, one of the worst epicenters of Europe and really of the world, headed into negative growth territory for some time there. But about a week ago, it turned the corner the bad way, and is now heading back into positive growth. So bad news for Spain. Spain seems to be heading back towards some sort of a new epidemic. And we'll see, maybe it'll turn around again, but what could be happening here is that people are getting careless. People think, oh, well, we've turned the corner, we've done well, our numbers are dropping, let's go do all the same things we used to do. And I start to see that here in California, where I am right now, or in Colorado, where I sometimes am, not so much, but in California, there's really a sense of, we're done with shelter in place, we're all going to go places, and there's a large degree of safety equipment you see. PPE or so on in public. So California is doing okay, but I just wonder whether that's what's happened in Spain, whether they let down their guard and now they're paying the price for that. Peru is recovering, and there are a lot of countries here that are below zero, probably more below zero than above zero. Some of the ones above zero, Spain is certainly, Spain, as we've talked about, Sweden and Mexico are the worst of the ones above zero because they're sharply heading upwards. The ones below zero, Turkey is way ahead of everyone else. We have very good news in the United States, pretty good news. Iran is doing okay. I can't quite grab this. Portugal, Netherlands. There are a lot of countries that are doing pretty well. So it's certainly a mixed bag here. We've got some winners and some losers, and of the winners, we've got downward trends and upward, or of the losers here, we got downward trends and upward trends, and of the winners, we got downward trends and upward trends. So not looking quite as nice as it did a couple weeks ago, where it really felt like every country of the world was headed towards zero and was headed there, possibly to stay. Definitely got some more problematic spots here, but no extreme problems. Even Mexico has just popped into the top 25. So even though their growth rate is fairly bad, their numbers are low, and so we may see Mexico recover, as seems to happen. We do have this tendency when things get very high in percentage for them to turn around, or when they get very low in percentage, like Spain, they tend to turn around. They tend to regress to the mean, as we say. So worldwide, the cases are flat. We're not seeing we see a plateau, but we don't see a downward trend. We do see that there's a slight downward trend that's being shown on our single strand rope chart here. Most recent case, or most recent day, average of 3 days, we saw a 4 or 5% reduction in new cases worldwide. So that's good, and the trend overall seems to be downward for the world. So good news for the world there. I'm not going to talk too much about deaths. Let's just move on. Maybe I'll just look and see if there's anything interesting in the rope chart for deaths. It is interesting that there are no dramatic upswings, no lines going up into the right, obviously, among the rope chart for the deaths. We do have this one real winner, which is Israel. Israel, I think, had a lot of deaths, though, so for them to be heading downward is not all that surprising. And they will surely turn around and flatten out a little bit. But mostly we have trends that are about flat for the deaths rope chart. Do we have testing? No, we don't have testing on this one. The overall trend for the world is it seems to have turned the corner. It seems to have peaked in deaths a week ago, but that's really hard to say. We did have 3 positive days and 1 negative, and so we'll keep watching that. But it looks like the world may have peaked in total deaths. Let's look at. Actually, let's take a look at the United States first as a country. In the country rope chart, because this is where things get a little interesting. The United States as a whole is looking very good, fairly good, as we saw before. It has this really low single day 20% drop, and then a couple days out of the past week, only 1 or 2 days have been positive in growth rate. So the United States as a whole is looking good on this graph. So remember that. The United States looks good. You'll need this. You'll be tested on this in the next slide. So if we look at the states, United States, the states are looking like they always do. New Jersey and New York are the ones with the most cases. We can see that New York's trend bending downward a little bit here, but that's much more obvious when you look at it on the daily graph, where we see that bend, that it really is bending downward. It's very hard to claim at this point that New York is doing anything but good. They're seeing fewer cases each day. Now, the very latest day isn't looking quite as good as some, but that's just one day. You don't pay attention to single days. We look at at least 3 days in a row before we say that something is remotely true. Looking at it per capita, the states per capita, New York, general shape of the curve will always be the same on the per capita chart as it is on the totals, but we can see that Rhode Island has passed everyone else in per capita. I think Rhode Island is doing a little better than it was, though. As we continue to the right, I believe we saw Rhode Island was recovering. Certainly New Jersey is recovering, but not as fast. New York is our real winner here, and with New York doing something like that, we could expect that the whole nation's numbers would be looking good, as we saw in the previous tab. So in Massachusetts, sure, Connecticut, okay, leveling off, and we see a few others that are doing very well. Louisiana continues to do well after giving us a scare. Michigan, similarly, gave us a scare but seems to be doing well. And there are others down in the noise here that are doing well, but even per capita they're in the noise, and so they don't contribute to the total numbers. We'll see them a little more here. Now the state's rope chart is very interesting. The rope chart by state. Resume that one. Let's try that again. Rope chart by state. So we saw a couple weeks ago this great trend. All the states were heading downward, kind of like we see on the world stage as well. Everyone was heading downward until around April 12th or 13th, where they turned this unfortunate corner, and now it seems like every state is headed upwards. Every state. One of the few exceptions, Rhode Island, as we said, is recovering, and this is in terms of their growth rates. It doesn't mean that we won't see, this is where we really see the difference between this chart and the one we were just looking at. It is completely possible for these charts to head downwards, meaning we have fewer new cases each day. Well, if we have fewer new cases each day, we should see, that should mean that the growth rate is heading negative. But it's possible for these to head downward while still bending upwards. So they're heading downward slower and slower. And that's what this chart really says, is are we headed towards a place where where these are going to turn back around and head upwards again. And the trend is looking kind of terrible at the state level. And this has swung in a matter of 3 days or something. As I've said, we do a rolling average of 3 days. We're looking for short-term trends here. And the short-term trends for the states are suddenly looking much worse. And this really forces the question, how can the states be looking like that? How can the states be looking this bad, as though they have a whole bunch more new cases, while the country as a whole is looking good? And so this definitely has me scratching my head and saying, is there something wrong with my analysis? So I got kind of deep into this earlier today. I got worried. Is there something wrong with the analysis? Well, certainly it could explain it, just that New York is below zero. New York is pulling our numbers down. But where the rest of the states aren't, mostly. We do have Ohio, by the way. We'll get into that briefly. Ohio, which had this crazy couple days, is now suddenly, actually I'll just get into Ohio briefly here. I did receive a link from one of my loyal listeners saying, look, here's the penitentiary or the prison where there were 2,000 cases. So Ohio only has 8 or 10,000 cases or something. Let's look. In a day, how many cases does Ohio have? Ohio this is per capita, that won't help us. In a normal day, Ohio has 400 cases or something. And so there are these 3 days here where we have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 cases. And that, I think, is nothing but that particular prison. That prison, they all got sick at once, they tested them all, they all tested positive, and so we have this, and that's the whole prison. Unless the workers in the prison carry that out into Ohio in general, which could certainly happen, the prisoners aren't going anywhere, then we've exhausted the possibility of that particular location to give any more cases to Ohio. So, like Cook County Jail and like some other places we've seen, like the homeless shelter in San Francisco, and like some mini little epicenters of immigrants being illegals, for instance, being held somewhere or waiting for their court cases. We see these little pockets where a whole population, a tiny population, relatively speaking, can all get coronavirus. And when that happens, we see a spike like this, but then once they essentially all have it, well, bummer for them, but the state at least then recovers. And so we saw this radical swing upwards in Ohio and a radical swing downward as that one is goes back into the noise. So Ohio then is looking great in its downward trend and its growth rate. But again, how can we have just a few states that are below zero while the country as a whole looks to be where all these states are above zero while the country as a whole appears to be showing a negative growth? Well, we could say again, New York is all that really matters because they have way more cases than anyone. So even a 2% drop in New York will offset this, but that's unlikely actually. New York cannot offset that much. So what I eventually found is I looked at a couple data sources. I really went back to this and said, are my numbers correct for the United States in new daily cases? The United States had 17, our three most recent data points, 17,000, 26,000, and 21,000. Is that correct? And the first place I looked had me getting kind of scared scared for my analysis, because these numbers, as shown, I think you can see this. I hope you can see this. Just take a quick look. Yeah. The numbers from worldometer.info, which is a very reputable source, are very different from those numbers. 30,000, 31,000, 38,000. Compare that to what I have in my numbers, 17, 26, 21. Worldometer says much higher. And they've got this real trend upwards for the United States in daily new cases, which indicates that maybe we've lost our trend downward and we're swinging upwards. And that's consistent with what we're seeing on the state level. The states are saying, we had it, but we lost it, and now we're headed upwards. Worldometer agrees. So are my numbers wrong? Well, maybe, but let's take a look at ourworldindata.org, which is what I'm actually using as my source here. Ourworldindata.org is where I pull my data from for the country information. Ourworldindata.org, which gets its data from the European Center for Disease Protection and Prevention and Control. Look at that. 17,000, 26,000, 21,000. So those are the numbers that I have in my graph, and their graph looks very nice. The daily number of cases for the United States trending downward and has three pretty low points in the most recent day, versus Worldometer, which is trending upwards and has three relatively high cases in the new day. So what's going on here? Well, what's going on here is the difference between new cases and confirmed new cases. In this case, our world in data is focusing on confirmed new cases. This means cases that have been tested and confirmed to have the virus by test. Whereas Worldometers and other sources, including the ones that I'm using here, Corona Data Scraper, there's been a gradual shift. We saw it first in China on that February 12th spike. We saw it more recently in the United States death counts. There's been a gradual shift towards counting things as coronavirus cases, even if they haven't been tested, if they are just presumed to be from other symptoms. If you look at a chest x-ray and you see the clear symptoms of coronavirus, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV, whatever the V2 virus, if you see those symptoms there in the chest x-ray, or even if you just see people who have a whole lot of difficulty breathing and we're exposed to other people with coronavirus, it may be categorized by the medical professionals who are looking at them as a coronavirus case, even if it doesn't come, if they haven't had a test done. Now, why wouldn't they have a test done? They wouldn't have a test done typically because there wasn't enough testing capacity to do it. So we see what's happening here is there are a bunch of cases that are being called coronavirus even though they weren't tested and confirmed through the RNA test to be coronavirus. Whereas in this data source, we're taking a more conservative line and saying it's only coronavirus if the RNA test says it is. So we end up with this difference here, where I'm pulling my data for states from a different source than I'm pulling it for countries. And the state data is the data that's including all these cases that we don't know are coronavirus, at least not from an RNA test, but we do really think are coronavirus, nevertheless, from chest X-rays and other strong indicators. Whereas my country data is taking a different approach and saying we're only going to call it coronavirus if it was tested and confirmed. So the good news is that these will converge. I expect these numbers will converge. The main reason that people are presumed coronavirus, as I understand it, but not actually counted as cases in our world in data as definite cases, is because the testing infrastructure hasn't been able to test them fast enough. We don't have enough tests even to test the people who are clearly ill with it. But the testing infrastructure is one thing that the world and the United States are madly working to build up. And so I think California, for instance, just caught up with its backlog. I think that in a matter of days, I think we're going to start to see these numbers converge because everyone's going to get a test. And then we'll know. There won't be any presumed anymore. Presumed cases will become confirmed because we'll get a test and we'll end up with rapid tests and we'll know very quickly, do these people really have the coronavirus? Do they have something else that just appears to be coronavirus? So I actually believe these numbers, more than these numbers, sorry to say. The United States, I'd love to think that it's trending downwards in this delightful way, but I think these are just the tests that have been done, and these are probably the cases that we really have. So I think there's probably been a shift recently. I've seen it in various places, and in fact, it was about a week ago that this shift definitely started to appear in our deaths data, where there is a shift. Corona Data Scraper pulls data, I think, from the county level and aggregates it there. It may also pull it from the state level, but I think they have an army of volunteers and an army of bots that pull data from the county level. And I think there was guidance at the county level that said, or guidance from the top, maybe the CDC or the World Health Organization, saying we should start counting presumed as real cases. And so I think what we're probably seeing here in this upward bend, I hope what we're seeing here is just a change, broadly a change in reporting. The presumed cases are being counted everywhere as, in the United States at least, as real cases, and so we see a lot more cases showing up. So if that's true, this isn't bad news, at least not as bad as it looks. It will then bend back downwards once all the counties have caught up, and once we start seeing, we no longer are comparing a week ago day where it was counted differently to now where it's being counted in this new way. We'll see the growth rates head back towards zero. But it is possible that these really are cases, and that we really are seeing across the country almost every state showing a resurgence in cases. States that seem to be doing better now doing worse. Also, as the testing abilities pick up, this will cease to matter. We'll start to be testing everyone, and we won't see this. At least the difference won't show up anymore. This graph will start to match this graph, where both of them will be trending up or down. I don't know. I don't know. Hopefully down, but maybe they'll both be trending up. If what's really happening here is we really do have a lot more cases and a growth of cases, then this graph's going to start trending upwards. If what's happening is that we just haven't been, we're now testing people at a higher level, and we're counting these presumed things and pretty soon we'll start counting the presumed things as once they're tested, we'll be able to say they're confirmed cases. Then this will trend back downwards once the reporting starts to align on both sides. Whatever it is, we'll see it. We'll see it the same. Right now we have this divergence from the two different ways of reporting how many cases we have. So I'm not going to get too alarmed by this. I'm going to hope that it's a difference in reporting, but we're going to watch. And over the next week, if this continues up and up and up, if all the states stay above zero, then we can say, well, this really is something. We really are seeing a nationwide resurgence or multi-centered epidemic of the virus. We will watch. But the big takeaway here is know where your data is coming from and know what it means, because we do have, I'm not going to try to change to a single source here. I actually kind of like having two different sources, but I am going to be focusing in coming days on the fact that these numbers don't match these numbers, and they won't necessarily. We can actually use that to say, well, the country as a whole is dropping in confirmed cases, but it's rising in suspected cases or presumed cases. What does that mean? We'll be watching you. We'll be watching all of these. So with that in mind, acknowledging that what we've now done from the previous slide to this one is shifted to presumed cases, probable cases. We are seeing an uptick in those, maybe because of reporting or maybe because of reality. But the uptick, let's just for now say, when I started doing this, I said I'm not trying to do anything but report the trends in the numbers. People were saying to me early on, well, shouldn't you be marking the shelter-in-place moments on your graphs, or shouldn't you be showing testing, or shouldn't you be back propagating from the deaths to these numbers rather than showing the current cases, because current cases as reported don't mean anything. I continue to say that the current cases don't really mean anything in the real world. We know this. They don't mean the current infections. We can even see that current cases are different, can be different based on whether we're doing presumed versus actual tested. But what I do believe is that over the long run, these numbers will trend towards reality. And these are the best numbers we have. And so if we see a trend like this upwards, that's something to be concerned about. But if it is only a change because of reporting, it will trend towards reality. The reporting change will eventually be embedded in a whole week of data, and we'll start to see, well, what is the trend based on this, the most recent data, where we're not comparing apples and oranges a week ago and now, but we're actually comparing apples to apples. So don't get too worried about these trends upwards. We don't really know what's causing them. I've just talked at length about what might be causing these trends. But if they were to represent some sort of an underlying indication of higher infection, that would be something to worry about. I'm not going to worry about that yet, but I will say that the trends as they stand for the data as it stands is definitely upward for almost all states. And we'll keep an eye on that. And my guess is in a week, we'll see these all trending back downwards, and it will turn out to have been a reporting anomaly or a change of reporting. In spite of the change of reporting, New York is doing well, though, and relatively well. They're still trending a little bit upwards in their growth rate, but they're still below zero. And so New York, I think what this may mean is they're doing so well that they are actually able to pull against this reporting trend to the point where they still show a negative growth. And same with Ohio, as Ohio is just this wild outlier that for a few days went crazy, and now it's regained its sanity and it's back probably where it belonged. And its downward trend, as we've seen that particular prison blip fall off our long-term radar, its downward trend is probably much weaker than this really indicates. If we were to subtract that prison, it's probably somewhere along with the rest of them, and not really an outlier. And it's in the infection rates of its overall population or its I'll say typical population. It's just because they had that one real outlying prison outbreak. So I tend to not really believe much of what I'm seeing here. I don't think we're in the midst of a simultaneous massive outbreak in every state, but we'll watch and see. In terms of testing, the news is good. Rhode Island continues to test very well. Let's just take a peek at Rhode Island here. I think this probably is Rhode Island. Yeah. So Rhode Island also is bucking the trend here. It's still above zero in its overall growth rate, but it was a real outlier as well. It had some sort of, maybe it had something similar. I don't know what happened to Rhode Island. If anyone knows, let me know. Did it have an Ohio? Did it have a Cook County jail? Did it have a San Francisco homeless situation? I don't know, but it may well have been something like that. Some very dense, or did it have that, like New York had that one particular neighborhood, some very dense cluster of cases that now that has maxed out, the rest of the state is just going on as though nothing happened along the normal trajectory. But Rhode Island, anyway, maybe they, because of that cluster, or because they saw the numbers, they got very worried and had the ability somehow, I still don't know how, to test at a much higher rate than everyone else. And they continue to do that, and they're pushing 5% now terrifically well, doing terrifically well. New York also, Louisiana, Michigan, Michigan, Massachusetts, New Jersey also doing very well. Where is Michigan? There's Michigan. Not doing quite so well, but in terms of testing. But everyone is coming up on 1% of total population tested. And the trends, the daily numbers, Rhode Island still is just blowing everyone away. 0.2–0.3% of their population tested every single day. So that's to say, every 3 to 5 days, they test another 1% of their population. Oddly, North Carolina, is it? Or is that Louisiana? I think we saw some data problems with Louisiana. Louisiana, where are you? I'm looking for it in the... Why can I not find Louisiana? There it is. Yeah, there's just something weird going on with Louisiana. Maybe they really have practically stopped testing. They might be able to get away with it. They've got a pretty good curve, but that's just weird. No one does that. No one's doing that. No one, once they reach the capacity to test 1,000 or 0.1% every day, suddenly drops way down and stops doing that. So I don't really believe this data. That would seem very foolish of Louisiana. But that's what the data says, but I don't really believe it. Tennessee is testing at a very nice rate. New York, Massachusetts. Okay, so those are the states. Again, very weird things going with their curves. I hope that it's a result of a change in testing or a change in reporting criteria. But if it isn't, then we'll see it persist. If it is, we'll see it drop off in just a few days. 3 days from now, we should see that totally turn around if it's just a change in the reporting criteria. So moving on to the counties of California, we have Los Angeles. Los Angeles, I don't know what to say. It's also, Los Angeles has suddenly reported a vast uptick. Now, maybe, just maybe, this is exactly that other effect we've been seeing, that Los Angeles has suddenly started reporting presumed cases rather than only confirmed cases. If so, then this is our new normal, this trend line. We will for a while have more presumed cases than confirmed cases, but then it will flatten off to something more like this once we're able to test every single case. And well, actually, I guess it depends. It depends on whether we always had a bunch of cases we didn't know about or that weren't included here because they were cases, but it was only marking presumed. That is probably likely. So maybe this will be our new normal, that we're now going to be testing more and more of them, and eventually, whether we're marking something as presumed or confirmed won't matter because everything will be confirmed. In any case, I hope that the reason that Los Angeles suddenly has had this spike is because they're now counting all the cases that are presumed. And previously, they didn't have the testing capacity to confirm everyone. And that's consistent with what we saw. We know a few days ago there was some article that said California has finally caught up with its backlog of testing. Let's look at some other big counties though and see. Yeah, so Riverside also seeing a strong upward trend recently, but in San Diego, I mean, Riverside not so much. As I was looking over these counties, yeah, is that Santa Clara? No. Santa Clara, not so much. Orange? If this really were a change in testing, global or at least United States wide testing criteria, reporting criteria, then we would expect all the counties to show that sort of an upward trend. So it may be that Los Angeles has just suddenly seen a spike, or it may be that that these other counties were already reporting presumed ones as actual cases, and Los Angeles wasn't, and they've started doing it. What we will see, regardless, is if this is the new normal. The real question is it shooting off to infinity? Is this suddenly spiking upwards because there's some new runaway epidemic in Los Angeles, or is it flattening off? And to my eyes, we're already seeing this mini trend flatten out. But let's look over here and see for sure. And yeah, this really does point to that. We had a spike in Los Angeles for whatever reason. Maybe it was a real spike of cases, or maybe it was a change in how they're reported. But we now have a very positive, very good downward mini trend in Los Angeles. They've already rejoined the trend line 5 days later. So we had this terrible few days where I was saying, wow, this really is starting to look like a new world for Los Angeles. Everything's different. They have a whole lot more cases than before, but pretty quickly they've recovered back to where that trend line was, or maybe a little above. It was probably more like, I can't point to it because you can't see my cursor. But in any case, the good news is that the daily new cases are dropping in Los Angeles, and that should make for very good news on our rope chart. So Los Angeles did have a sustained blip there, but the blip is dying away steadily. We look at other counties, San Diego. Actually, let's just go straight to the rope chart. Well, no, let's stop briefly at the per million. Imperial was I think just yesterday even, was well above everyone else, but it's starting to fade away. This again is this regression to the mean that we can expect to see. When anyone gets too extraordinary, they will tend over time to return, whether they're extraordinarily good or extraordinarily bad. It is expected that they will return to the pack. They'll rejoin the pack. So we have never seen some particular county or state or country just blast its way up way above everyone else and stay there forever. New York, well, you see this, but it's per capita is the way that we can really see this. We do see Los Angeles and Imperial way above everyone else, or slightly above everyone else once we adjust for population. But they're not going to stay there. Los Angeles, as we see, is trending downward. All of these, Imperial is now not showing nearly as much of a growth as it did. We will see these rejoin the pack, and Imperial is starting to show that. Looking at the rope chart, by the way, I thought that I'd made up a word yesterday, bifurcation, when there were two different groups heading upwards, and so all of them were headed either upwards. They were either above zero and heading upwards, or below zero and heading downwards. But turns out it was a great word, bifurcate, to divide into two branches or forks. And that's exactly what this is doing. It was doing. It's not nearly so clear now, but we had the ones headed downward. We had the branch headed upwards. So yes, that is a word. Thank you to my mother for teaching me good grammar. Um, the bifurcation has dropped away somewhat here. We were seeing a lot of them that were headed upwards were heading further upwards, and the one that were above zero were heading upwards, and below zero were heading downwards. We're now seeing some trend busters where Imperial, as we saw, which was running away, is now starting to come to its senses and head back towards zero. And same with Fresno. Fresno, I think, was headed upwards and is now trending back downwards. There still are a lot of counties that are trending upwards. San Luis Obispo, by the way, has kind of crazy runaway growth right now, 20% and rising. We have San Diego, the same thing. These are certainly our worst news of the day in terms of counties. As we've seen, this sort of extreme trend doesn't last typically. It kind of did for a while for New York, and I guess you could say it did for Los Angeles, but usually when counties start to do this, especially if they're counties that don't have a lot of population or a lot of cases, they do tend to head back downward. Now, San Diego does have a lot of population and a lot of cases, so maybe this really is our new, our upcoming Los Angeles. Where is San Diego in here? It hasn't broken out of the middle of the pack per capita. Let's see how it's doing when we don't look at it per capita. It really is trying to break out of the pack. Where is Los Angeles? Okay, yeah, Los Angeles was taken out of that. Ignoring Los Angeles, San Diego, well, I liked it better when I zoomed in on it. San Diego does have this troublesome curve where it is accelerating. This is the new daily cases, so the trend upward isn't so obvious. I mean, it's obvious it's trending upwards, but what we can't see on this graph is what we see on the rope chart, which is that San Diego has a very high growth rate and is accelerating. So San Diego is definitely our worst news right now. Sure, San Luis Obispo is looking problematic. San Luis Obispo, though, is down in the bottom 5, so it doesn't have a lot of cases. So San Diego is our worst news of the day. Solano, Los Angeles. Los Angeles actually, it's interesting. I would have guessed from what we saw here. I guess it's just because it does have all these points that are so much above what we've seen. Los Angeles is still being indicated in our rope chart as a problem, as 9% growth day over day. It's because we have this fairly long or slightly longer 3-day window on this 3-day average. Los Angeles, it's still, the rope chart is still taking these points pretty seriously as a strong upward trend. But we can look at it either way. We can say, well, these are way above everything we've seen, so yes, Los Angeles is obviously seeing an upward trend in overall, or we can say in the very short term it's seeing a downward trend. If we actually look at if we zoom in, we should see that its most recent points. Yeah, this is how the rope chart works. The most recent points are quite good because we can see that in the past 5 days, the trend has been downward, and so we have these 2 points that are 8 or 9% below zero to indicate that recently Los Angeles has done well. Not enough though to pull this line down yet. We had too much when that thing here happened, when it suddenly shot off into the stratosphere. That gave us some serious growth for a few days, and now the rope chart is still saying, well, it still looks to me like Los Angeles as a whole is rising. And they might be, but if I were to guess, I'd say Los Angeles is falling. You be the judge. Look short term or long term, Los Angeles looks different. No one is doing great. We don't have any 20% drops, but it's perfectly adequate to be below zero and stable. That's all we need. And there are a lot of these counties: Sonoma, Tulare, San Joaquin, which are below zero and stable. Riverside, no, it's Ventura. Riverside is looking good. It's 5% dropping, 5% fewer cases each day and dropping. Ventura, not looking quite as good. It's below zero, but it's rising. So it could lose its grip on this nice negative growth it's got. So what is it overall? What do we have overall here? As we've seen, let's go back to just California as a whole. New daily cases, California. Well, maybe I didn't even zoom in on this. California as a whole is not looking good on this chart. It's showing a 12% growth rate and rising. As we saw, a lot of states are doing this right now, and this is where I say, hopefully this is just a change in reporting. And if so, 3 days from now, we'll see that head down. Even tomorrow, we should start to see those head down. And so California as a whole is growing, and we're seeing this in the counties showing a growth rate. It's possible that this is a new epidemic for California, that California really does have epidemic growth happening in multiple counties and multiple places. But I'm not going to fret about that quite yet. Ask me again in 3 days. For now, the charts look bad, but we don't know why. And we have a good theory that isn't too terrible about why that could be. Okay, so in testing, San Francisco is testing very well, 1.5%. Nowhere near the top testers of the country, but very well. San Mateo, San Diego. All the counties are doing, or the ones we know about, are doing pretty well in testing. And I guess I didn't really talk about testing, or did I? I just want to look at California's testing here. California had this remarkable spike of testing. This was probably the day that they caught up with their backlog. They'd probably batched them all off in some other state or some other country to do a huge backlog of tests. They all came back in one day. But the testing as a whole is still not doing very well in California. It's just nowhere near even New York, certainly nowhere near Rhode Island. So testing, not so good in California. Yeah, so you look at the raw data, the news is bad. So we'll just have to wait a few days to see if that really is an indication of an epidemic coming in California, or whether it's just a change in the way numbers are being reported. Hopefully the latter. If it is a change in how numbers are being reported, it'll show up that rope chart very quickly. Because as long as numbers are being consistently reported over 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, the rope chart will show a downward trend if there is one. Even though the numbers are higher, and consistently higher than they used to be, we'll see a downward trend because the rope chart is talking about the relative changes in numbers. All right, that's quite enough. I've been going for a long time today. I really wanted to focus on that question of why we see either a huge growth in the United States or a sudden upward spike or a downward spike. It all depends how you count it. I'll be back tomorrow. Maybe we'll start to see some of these supposed growth trends evaporate, or maybe they'll continue. We'll see. I'm Greg Farrar. That is the news. COVID-19 trend news for April 25th, 2020. Thanks for watching.